Good evening, viewers, and welcome to this edition of Energy This Week. I'm Ademola Adedoyin. This week, we are focusing on the contending forces for crude oil production in Nigeria. How firm or tenuous is the nation's control of these forces?
One day, we had a vision to improve the way people access their fuel products. Now, 1 in 5 cars drives on our fuel. But that was not enough. So we pioneered the provision of cleaner, safer fuel to local industries through the fastest growing gas supply network in sub-Saharan Africa. Still, that was not enough. So we invested in the acquisition of rigs for oil and gas exploration. Strive towards our future when we, a proudly Nigerian company, will offer the complete solution to Nigeria's energy needs. Owando, the future is here.
Let's take you through the events, activities, and developments that dominate the industry during the week.
Good evening, viewers. Welcome to News of the Week. My name is Azizat Sani. First, the headlines. NLNG and Nimasa crisis pushes up cooking gas price. Nigeria Contact Act creates 15,000 direct jobs. Lagos inches closer to oil producing status. Now the details. The scarcity of liquefied petroleum gas, popularly known as cooking gas, which became noticeable last week, has worsened this week with major plants in Lagos and Ogun State rationing the product and increasing the price. It was gathered that the scarcity was due to the debt crisis between the Nigerian Liquefied Natural Gas Limited and the Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency, which fueled speculations of an imminent crisis in the gas subsector. Checks and reports have revealed that a 12-kilogram cylinder of gas, which normally goes for about 3,000 naira, now sells for between 3,300 naira and 3,400 naira in Lagos. Further checks reveal that in Nigerian Liquefied Natural Gas Limited vessel that should have delivered LPG on June 28 had been delayed due to deepening debt crisis between Nimasa and Nigerian Liquefied Natural Gas Limited, but the vessel is expected to berth in Lagos by the end of the week. The Nigerian Contact Act in the oil and gas industry has created over 15,000 direct jobs since it was signed into law on April 22, 2010. The Minister of Petroleum Resources, Mrs. Desiani Alin-Semadikwe, has said. Speaking at the weekend during the groundbreaking ceremony for line pipe mill and coating facility being constructed in Ikaye community in the Ologbo area of Edo State by Technova African Group Limited, the minister said the legislation has also created about 10,000 training and attachment opportunities for Nigerians since it was enacted. She said the federal government will be anxious to see the Technova's pipe mill project progress to completion because of the tremendous impact it will have on the host communities and Nigeria. She identified increased commercial activities, opportunity for small businesses, creation of over 500 direct jobs and thousands of indirect jobs as some of the benefits of the Technova project. With the recent discovery of crude oil by United Kingdom-listed Afrin plc and its partner, Optimum Petroleum Development Limited, in Oil Prospecting License OPL 310, Lagos State has an increasingly great potential to join the League of Oil-Producing States. Before the latest discovery, 4 companies were prospecting for oil in Lagos following the earlier discovery of crude in the Ajay oil field located in Oil Mining Lease OML 113 by Yinka Folawiyo Petroleum. The companies which were prospecting for oil in OPL 241, 311, 310 and 302 respectively offshore Lagos include Oil World, Sunlink, Optimum and James Petroleum. That's all for the news of the week. Thanks for watching. I am Azizat Sani.
In business circles, oil assets are oil prospecting licenses and mining leases, also known as oil blocks, which are available for exploration, development and production in a given producing country. For Nigeria, its proven oil assets, as at last count, are made up of a total of 388 oil blocks. 201 of these blocks, that is 109 oil mining leases and 92 oil prospecting licenses, have been awarded to operators that include international oil companies (IOCs), national oil company (NOCs), and indigenous oil companies, also referred to as independent oil companies. Energy This Week's investigation shows that the IOCs on the one hand and independent oil producing companies and the national oil companies on the other hand share the blocks almost equally. Ordinarily, the implication of this should be that IOCs and indigenous producing companies should stand shoulder to shoulder in volume of crude oil produced daily. But is this the situation? Facts on ground point at an embarrassingly wide production disparity between the two groups, which places the IOCs in total control of the sector. The 2012 scenario vividly illustrates this position. For that year, the federal government set a production target of 2.48 million barrels per day, that is 1.5 million barrels per day from onshore and shallow water terrain, and 900 to 800 barrels per day from deep water concessions. Available records show that in 2012, the indigenous producers, together with the nation's oil company, Nigerian Petroleum Development Company, NPDC, a subsidiary of the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, the NNPC, involved in upstream operations, collectively produced only 276,000 barrels per day production target set by the government. The international oil companies, which include Shell Petroleum Development Company, SPDC, Mobil Producing Nigeria Unlimited, Chevron Nigeria, Total Elf, and Ajib, produced 2,121,956 barrels per day, about 88% of the production target set for the year. With a joint venture arrangement with the federal government, these IOCs, which determine what production cost is, take 40% on the average, leaving the federal government with 60%. Under similar arrangement, some oil-producing countries take as much as 80% from such joint venture operations. That the IOCs continue to totally dominate crude oil products in the country only point at one fact: policy failure. Some 23 years ago, that is in 1990, under the military regime of General Ibrahim Babangida and with Professor Jubril Aminu holding the fort as the Petroleum Resources Minister, a policy of discretionary allocation of oil blocks to indigenous companies were embarked upon. The rationale behind the policy was to curtail the dominance of the IOCs in oil production in Nigeria. Under the policy of discretionary allocation, some 37 indigenous companies were allocated 43 oil blocks between November 1990 and December 1996. In furtherance of this policy, the federal government in 2003 allocated 24 marginal fields to indigenous companies to step up crude oil production by independent producers. The government had expected that the local players will work at catching up with the IOCs, thereby increasing, remarkably, the nation's daily production. More than 2 decades later, what this policy has yielded is a paltry 11% contribution to the nation's daily crude oil production output. Analysts agree that while a few of the awardees of these blocks made commendable efforts and went ahead to make a success of their highly technical and largely capital-intensive venture, so we're only interested in how the allocation could be used to make quick wealth, while others saw it as a status symbol. With Nigeria's economic fate still firmly in the hands of the international oil companies, who in recent years appear unenthusiastic in investing in increasing reserves and producibility in the country, experts are of the opinion that the time to evolve a workable policy that will put Nigeria in control of crude oil and gas production is now. While they agree that they cannot be brought about overnight, they nonetheless contend that a journey of 1,000 kilometers starts with the first step, which must head towards the right direction. While some are of the radical opinion that the government should nationalize the country's oil assets and set up private sector-driven national oil company to manage same as it was done in a country like Venezuela, others are of the moderate view that through appropriate legislation, the genuine independent operators could be empowered to produce more and gradually reduce the dominance the IOCs have over a period of time. Such legislation must also give Nigeria a better deal in its relationship with its joint venture partners than it is currently the case. Either of the two divergent views or somewhere in between lies the solution to Nigeria's search for the control of its most prized assets, crude oil and gas.
One day, we had a vision to improve the way people access their fuel products. Now, 1 in 5 cars drives on our fuel. But that was not enough. So we pioneered the provision of cleaner, safer fuel to local industries through the fastest growing gas supply network in sub-Saharan Africa. Still, that was not enough. So we invested in the acquisition of rigs for oil and gas exploration. We strive towards our future when we, a proudly Nigerian company, will offer the complete solution to Nigeria's energy needs. Owando, the future is here.
This is one edition that takes a critical look at the nation's oil blocks known in the industry as oil assets. Between the international oil companies and the indigenous companies who hold more of these assets. Why have the I.O.Cs, as they are known, continued to dominate the crude oil production in spite of policy measures put in place to reverse the trend? Why have indigenous companies continued to play insignificant role in crude oil production even while they hold as many assets as the I.O.Cs? Is the Nigerian government getting the best deal from the existing arrangements with joint venture partners, also known as I.O.Cs? This and many other knotty issues in respect of the nation's crude oil production arrangement will be looked into this evening. To take a dispassionate look at this issue are two leading industry players and respected industry voices. In the studio this evening is the Managing Director, Chief Executive Officer of Frontier Oil Limited, one of the indigenous companies that are involved in crude oil exploration and production, Mr. Dada Thomas. Welcome to the program, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Demola. It's a pleasure to be here once more.
Thank you. Also in the studio with us this evening is the veteran earth scientist, a former senior staff of one of the international oil companies, Chevron, an industry activist, and in fact, a journalist by vocation. Welcome to our studio, Mr. Tony Akyosho.
Thank you very much, Demola.
Let me first start with Mr. Thomas. Sometime in 1990, the military government of General Ibrahim Babangida embarked on awarding oil blocks on discretionary allocation, on discretionary basis to indigenous players. By 1996, about 43 oil blocks have been awarded to about 37 oil companies. More have since been awarded to other indigenous companies. Now, 22 years down the line, how will you assess this policy? Will you say, for instance, that the aim of the policy is being achieved?
Thank you, Demola. First of all, I think that it was a good thing that a policy was initiated to involve Nigerians in the upstream E&P industry, something which has been basically concretized by the efforts of the late 2000 and co. Now, whether the policy has been achieved or not depends on what you see of the result on the ground. And I think in effect, you would see that most of those discretionary awarded fields or OML blocks are not in production, which means that, in essence, the policy may not have achieved its true objective. That doesn't detract from the goodness or the positive intention of the policy. You have to therefore ask yourself, why hasn't the policy objective been met? The issue was discretionary award to people, and the question is, were those people or organizations capable of managing the asset and the resource that was given to them to manage? And I think the clear answer is no. Only a few of them. We can see corn oil, for instance, as a very good example. We can see Monopulo actually actualize the objective. Most of them went hawking those assets all over the place, and they play a very, very, very tiny role in the actualization of the assets. We were at a marginal field conference last week, and it was said that despite the difficulties of the 2003 marginal field round, more of them have come onto production 33% in actual fact, 9 out of 24
Oh,
fields
that's
have come into
impressive.
production when you compare it to those discretionary awarded
The
OMLs and
90s,
blocks
yeah.
of the last 23 years.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, Mr. Kyosho. According to figures from the Department of Petroleum Resources, there are about 388 blocks, oil blocks in Nigeria. And out of these, as at the end of 2012, about 201 of them have been allocated. Almost half of these were allocated to indigenous players. Now, is this not a policy failure? If we are talking of a situation where what the indigenous players are contributing to national production is just about 11%, just some 276,000 barrels per day. Is that not a policy failure?
No, well, thank you very much. Of course, Mr. Thomas has already explained the fact that, he was trying to be very nice about calling it a policy failure, really. But he did give the government, a credit for initiating the policy. But we must be careful. Geology is not statistics. 200, you said half of this number of blocks have been awarded.
Yeah, maybe about
yeah,
half,
that,
yes.
it depends on where these blocks are located. Even as of then, everybody knew that what blocks were awarded to the Nigerian companies were essentially on the flanks of the basin. Corn oil, which eventually became the only one of the 1993 class of awardees, had the block in, close to Ondo State. Ondo State is marginal, Edo State is marginal, Imo State is marginal. Those are not core Niger Delta. The core Niger Delta states are Delta, Rivers, Bayelsa, So if you are not having blocks in those places, you have the kind of challenges that those people have had. But even then, as I will quote Mr. Thomas again, this class were not prepared. Don't forget that they were awarded based on the fact that they had business experience in other areas of the economy. And essentially, Professor Aminu wanted to do something good, and he looked around and he thought, well, Mr. Ibru was a very successful fish businessman. So, have a block. Dr. Udoji, you've done very well for the country. Have a block. Chief Abiola, you're very, business savvy. Have a block. And that's how these blocks were awarded.
Tony, what I've always looked at is this. Those blocks were awarded. I just mentioned the example of Otumba Academia. I recall as a reporter, I broke the news that Summit Oil, that should be Easter of 92, made a discovery. I was the first to report it.
Yeah.
And that before then, Consolidated Oil had made a discovery Christmas Eve of 91. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make is that when those blocks were allocated, there appeared to be some zeal on the part of the people that were giving those discretionary allocation. And I'm just trying to look at it that if the government had just perhaps, like you said, had taken a look at the policy 5 years, 10 years, and now and again, as okay, let us review it, let us update it, and all of that. What will you say the government should have done, to keep these guys going?
No, if you give a guy something, it's like the parable of those, 3 people where, you gave someone half, he buried it somewhere, and someone took it and took advantage and did something, and the third guy probably spent, whoever wasn't very keen, you will find out. And you will not bother about such people, and you take your blocks away.
Good.
As I speak, a lot of those blocks were still hanging with the owners of those blocks.
About 22 years later.
Whereas if it was, we tend to be very proactive taking blocks from I.O.Cs when they don't work it. But we don't do the same thing to our people.
That is part of what I'm talking about. We'll come back to that, Mr. Dada Thomas. Now, truly the indigenous players are confronted with intimidating odds, funding, community-related challenges, looking for technical partners, and all of that. Now, it remains disturbing that even the marginal fields that were allocated in 2003 As at the time I got some record, about 6 are active, of course, including yours. Will you agree with the view that there is the need to review the policy of allocating assets to indigenous companies, as Mr. Akinsho is trying to postulate?
First of all, out of what we call the class of 2003, 24 marginal fields.
24 marginal fields,
Today, 9 are in production, including ours,
yes,
which joined the class in December last year. So that's something like over 33% of the class of 2003 are in production. And that's a positive thing. I'm an optimist, okay? I would say that just because a program has difficulties and does not fully attain the stated objectives within a short time does not mean you should give up on it. Okay? What you need to do, and I think if I listened to a presentation that was made last week by the representative of the DPR director, is to look at what was the policy objective in the first place, what were the issues, what were the systems that were set up to achieve that objective, why did we not achieve those objectives? Once you know the why not, then you can take the corrective actions for the future to ensure that those kind of pitfalls do not repeat themselves.
Yeah, the class of 2003, the marginal field allottees, about 24 of them. What is the rate of success? How far have they gone? And in concrete terms, what is the contribution to daily production now? I know that it can be very marginal, but get us the figures.
Okay. There were actually 24 fields awarded to 31 companies.
Okay.
And within at least 6 or so of those fields had more than one company who were forced into a marriage. A marriage. Not a marriage in which they courted themselves, but a marriage in which, you must work with that one. So that is, at least those 6 companies had problems from day one. And that's what has contributed in some part to the fact that only 9 out of 24 fields are in production. But 9, as I said earlier, 9 out of 24 is better than the award from for 23 years.
Yeah.
It is definitely better. And the reason it's better is that industry professionals participated in the class of 2003 awards. Okay, people at least knew technically what they were doing.
Okay, sorry, just snapping. The 9 companies, what is the volume of their contribution to national production now?
If I believe the recent data we saw last week, we're contributing 2.1% to daily production.
A daily production of about 2.48 million barrels per day.
Yes, okay. You mentioned that maybe all indigenous companies are producing about 10 or 11%.
11%, yeah.
And we're contributing 1.6% to the reserves of the nation.
Now let me go to Mr. Kesho. We look at the I.O.Cs and we say that today they continue to dominate production. Of course, they've been there for long, and you look at it, close to 90% of the 2.48 million barrels per day, they do. And there has been this contention that the I.O.Cs, that they continue to dominate, and that, in fact, the joint venture agreement, the PSC, and all that, and in fact, the cash cut, that all this weigh heavily in favor of I.O.Cs. Now, my question is this. How do you think we can strike a balance between the national interest and ensuring that we continue to have a good relationship with these our friends who have been there for a long time with us? How do we strike a balance?
You have to define your national interests.
Yeah.
And we need to be very careful about, possibly vilifying the so-called IOC.
No, we are not about to do that. Yes.
Dada Thomas was a very big engineer in Shell. And much of what he knows about the oil is because he went through the Shell school.
Yeah.
Now, a whole lot of, when these old people started out in 1991, the tendency was that once you got a block from Shell, because quite a number of the blocks that were given to the Nigerians were taken from the I.O.C. And there was the tendency that once the Nigerians got it, you don't have new geologists being employed anymore. Whereas whenever an I.O.C. came, it captured a large source of Nigerian employees. When Statoil came, there were so many people employed. So it's very important that in your so-called national interest, you need to construct what it is that you want to do with the international environment.
My take is this. If, for instance, the IOCs are producing about 90% of our daily production, my question is, at what price? What is the cost of a barrel of crude oil production in Nigeria compared with what operates in other parts of the world? Now, if we have a joint venture agreement where you are talking of 60-40, okay, and you are talking of a situation where cash call, it is the IOCs that calculate how much they've spent and all that, only for NAPIMS to just take some look and all of that. Okay, you are looking at it, you are saying to yourself, am I deriving maximum value from every barrel produced by these IOCs? So my take is not just about getting Nigerians to be producing as it were. You get it now? Yes, but getting to ensure that Nigeria and Nigerians are not shortchanged. Even the local content, I mean the national content you spoke about. IOCs, a time was in this country, maybe just a few years now, we are just getting over that, where all the engineering, fabrication, and so on and so forth were done offshore. Okay, so in the final analysis, that is capital flight, huge capital flight. And in the final analysis, you say they are producing for Nigeria. These are some of the things I'm talking about.
But sorry to interrupt. Yeah. There's still a fundamental statement Toyin has made, which is important, which is define your national interests first. Once you define what your national short, medium, and long-term interests are, formulate your policies to actualize that. Yeah. Then you have to have the strategy to actually get those policies going. Now, I fully agree with you that are we deriving maximum benefit from the barrel that is produced? It's not the IOC's job to do that for you. It is up to you. If you're going to play football, you should learn the rules of the game. And you should understand, the entire nuances of the game so that when you're playing, nobody can cheat you. It is up to you to employ or have systems in which you have dedicated, committed professionals who will do the job of ensuring that when the IOCs bring their books, look, yes, we agree or we don't agree. And they act not on the basis of self, but on the basis of the national interest. Yeah. This is the reason there's a difference between Petrobras, Petronas, and our NNPC today.
NPDC, yeah. Yes, Mr. Kyosho. In a bid to ensure that Nigeria takes greater control of its crude oil production, a number of suggestions have been made by experts. One of them is, hey, nationalize like Venezuela did, and set up a state-controlled, a state-owned oil company that is private sector-led that will be able to take proper control and management of this asset. Some feel that we should negotiate with IOCs to have a better deal. What is your position on this?
Toyin, let me come in there as well. But yet the private sector are showing that Africans, Nigerians can run business properly. Okay? And therefore, I go back to what I said earlier on. It is fundamentally, for me, it's fundamental that government has no business running business. The job of government is to set an enabling environment for its people to go and create wealth, and by statute, you tax those businesses, and you take that tax, you redistribute it in the program that would uplift the generality of people. Okay? Please, we can do what you're asking by empowering indigenous operators, indigenous entrepreneurs who are committed, and they're not just after a quick buck. We can do it by encouraging Nigerians who want to create wealth.
Yes, so Mr. Kyosho, from what Mr. Thomas is saying, his take is that encourage those indigenous players who have demonstrated that they can actually perform, and they've been performing.
And when they grow, you basically have the so-called national production that you're looking for.
I wanted to ask Mr. Thomas about what he wants to see in the PIB. He had pointed at quite a couple of issues. I don't know if you want to say some other things.
I think I've said the most important. We need the right fiscal regime, first of all, to develop gas assets. Okay. Do not increase taxation, please. Okay. Leave it at 30%. then let's look at the generality of encouraging indigenous operator. We need fiscal terms which are favorable for indigenous operators to grow. Why do I say that? When let's say Total or Chevron came to Nigeria, they got initially one asset. Today they have many assets. Okay, Shell has some 38 acreages in Nigeria. Why should indigenous people remain with only one field? I'm not even talking about one OML, one field. That's not right. We need fair access on a competitive and transparent basis to additional acreage. Let us bid for it transparently, but onshore, all relinquished assets must go in a bid to indigenous players only.
Thanks so much, Mr. Thomas. Yeah. So your take on this, which is the parting shot. What would you want to see in PIV in the context of all that we have discussed today?
My own principal target is an independent petroleum inspectorate commission, which is something like running the central bank, the way the central bank is run without no interference from the Ministry of Finance. Right now, you know, the DPR is just basically some civil service environment that reports virtually everything he has to do to the minister and doesn't feel empowered to do a whole range of things. It doesn't have the funding, it doesn't have the expertise, it's struggling. We need to reform the DPR the way it is and get something that is more elevated. Right now, there was two DPR directors ago actually was moved from DPR director, which is a regulator, to become some executive director in NNPC. That should stop. You know, the regulator should be a very, dynamic, strong, independent regulator. You can have an issue with the gentleman, just like a lot of people have issues with Sanusi, but he's independent and the minister can't say anything.
Thanks so much, Mr. Thomas. We sincerely appreciate you for coming to be part of us this evening. This is a session that has been very enlightening. This is a session that has actually shown the way forward for the authorities, for the people in government to be able to say yes. I mean, we can take some from what we have heard here today. We sincerely appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Demola. It's a pleasure, as always.
So, thanks for being there always. Thanks for the contribution. Anyway, we expected nothing less than this, and we sincerely appreciate your time for being here and for taking time to really take all these issues as we brought them out. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you, my brother.
Yeah.
One day, we had a vision to improve the way people access their fuel products. Now, 1 in 5 cars drives on our fuel. But that was not enough. So we pioneered the provision of cleaner, safer fuel to local industries through the fastest growing gas supply network in sub-Saharan Africa. Still, that was not enough. So we invested in the acquisition of rigs for oil and gas exploration. Strive towards our future when we, a proudly Nigerian company, will offer the complete solution to Nigeria's energy needs. Owando, the future is here.
Well, viewers, I'm sure that you've enjoyed our guest this evening. And we are not in doubt that you want to offer some opinion, given what they have said here today. Do not hesitate to reach us with your views and positions through our email, info@energydistrict.tv. And for a better appreciation of this issue, please log on to our website, energydistrict.tv. Till I come your way next week, I remain yours sincerely, Ademola Adedoyin. See you next week.